for Congress Live. If you're sitting around wondering where the noise is coming, come to the Congress Live site. The special thing is if you get a seat, you get to have a chance to be part of a conversation which is going to be probably the most positive union conversation that we'll have for the entire Congress. Here we go. Look at this, people coming through the door. This all looks very formal, but the plan for this is to make it very informal. So I'm sorry, guys. I thought we'd just be sitting around in seats, relaxed, and the idea is we just want to sort of bounce some ideas off each other. Before we get going, I'll just introduce myself, Peter Lewis. I've worked around unions for way too long. I think I first met Sally when she was organising call centres before the millennium. And it's just an honour to be part of Sharon's final hurrah as ITUC president and to be part of this great event. So the idea of Congress Live is it's a chance to get some of the leaders of our movement to talk more broadly and with each other about some of the bigger issues that all unions are confronting around the world. Today's session is entitled Unions on the Frontline of Democracy, Elections in Australia, Brazil, Somalia and the US. And our panel are leaders of the movements in those countries. So I'd like to introduce Liz, who's the president of the AFL-CIO, Sally, who is the secretary of Australia's ACTU, Omar, who is General Secretary of FESTU in Somalia, but also head of the Journos Union over there, and we'll talk a bit about more later, and Lisboa, who is the International Secretary of the CUT Brazil. Now, Lisboa has to get off to a very important meeting at 2 o'clock, so he's going to have a little bit more of the floor time at the start, but we'll make up for that later. But really, there's a lot said about attacks on democracy and the rise of the right. But on this stage, we've actually got 4 leaders who have been part of successful election campaigns over the last 12 months. And so we end this year with real positivity on the difference unions can make in the democratic process. And today what we want to talk about is how the movements work in similar ways, but also the differences, and how we learn off each other to be more effective in our politics. And so before we go deep, and as I said, we're going to sort of talk about Brazil, which is probably our really great result over the last few weeks with Lisboa. I just wanted to quickly, before we jump into that, just quickly for each of you to anchor the discussion, talk about what relationship unions in your country have with the political system, because it's different in every country. So Sally, given that I know what you're going to say, but what's the relationship between unions and our political parties?
So Australian Unions set up the Labor Party of Australia, and they are structurally tied to it in that unions affiliate to the Labor Party and they have a say in the democratic structures of the Labor Party. Not all unions are affiliated, but a lot are. And that means that we've got a different, relationship. In terms of the other parties in Australia, there's, it's a Westminster system, so there's a Liberal and the National parties, which are the Conservative and the right-wing parties, and there's also been and there's the Greens, which is an environmental party, which is more on the left, and there's also more and more far-right parties. So we've got a traditional party, the One Nation, which has been around for a while, but there's an election happening right here in Victoria at the moment, and I voted yesterday. I got postal vote, and there was like 3 very far right-wing parties that weren't there before, and this is a pandemic issue and a bit to do with the move to the right and authoritarianism.
I better jump to Lisboa because I see the clock ticking down and your important meeting coming soon. So what is the relationship? I know we've got in Lula a union leader who is now president, but what's the institutional connection between unions and your political parties?
Okay, thank you. I was speaking in Portuguese because my English is not very bad. It's very bad. So I will answer you about the first point in Portuguese, and my colleague Claire will be the translation. Então, nossa relação institucional, primeiro registrar que nossa luta no Brasil começou já, para eleger o Lula agora, começou já bem antes até da prisão do Lula. Nós tivemos um papel, assim, uma responsabilidade, uma necessidade muito grande de levar ao mundo, né, qual era a verdadeira, o que acontecia de verdade no Brasil, que era uma perseguição política utilizando o poder judiciário e prendendo Lula para que ele voltasse, evitar que ele voltasse a ser presidente do Brasil. Hoje nós estamos muito felizes porque não só nós provamos a inocência do Lula, como o povo brasileiro teve a oportunidade de novamente eleger para presidente. E as nossas relações são institucionais e políticas, especialmente com os partidos de esquerda do Brasil, especialmente o Partido dos Trabalhadores. Nosso papel foi exatamente complementar a luta política dos partidos nas ruas.
So, first of all, our struggle started actually a long time ago to elect Lula. Actually, it started even before his prison. And we had to show to the world actually what happened, that he was innocent, and his prison meant political persecution. So today we are really very happy because it is clear that he's innocent and people voted for him as a president. And our relations with the parties in our country are mainly with left parties, and especially with the Workers' Party. And together with the parties, we are on the streets fighting for our rights.
Would you like, in your time, just to tell us a little bit about the way that the unions participated in the successful campaign, how close it was, and what you think made a difference?
Nós, durante esse processo eleitoral, nós costumávamos dizer que essas seriam as eleições das nossas vidas para os trabalhadores brasileiros. E nós entendíamos que, portanto, eram as eleições mais importantes do ano de 2022. Para nós, trabalhadores, não só do Brasil, na nossa avaliação do mundo inteiro, mas também da extrema-direita global, que nós sabemos que se organiza em vários países do mundo. Então, eu costumava dizer que nós, especialmente eu, né, entrei numa espécie de modo eleição, ou seja, ficamos meses em que o principal desafio nosso era vencer as eleições, combater as fake news, combater a extrema-direita brasileira, combater o uso da máquina do governo para tentar vencer as eleições. E isso foi feito no trabalho de rua, numa rede que nós chamamos de brigadas digitais, com dezenas de milhares de pessoas utilizando as redes sociais para fazer o combate às fake news e, obviamente, no convencimento aos trabalhadores nos nossos locais de trabalho.
So during the electoral process, actually, Lisboa said it's the election that happened this year in Brazil is what it was considered by us as the elections of our lives. It was the most important election for us in this period and also in 2022. And we believe it also represents an importance also not only for the Brazilian people but for the world, because there was a fight against the extreme right, and especially himself entered what is called an election mode. So there were many months facing many challenges, trying to destroy the fake news, the use of the state in favor of the other candidate, a lot of work in the streets, in the working places, and also what we call the digital brigades, is using the networks, the social networks, to try to destroy, let's say, the fake news.
Thank you very much. Liz, American system is another different beast. A lot of your elections are actually about motivating turnout, which is different to us in Australia where you get fined if you don't vote. What were the roles, like what did you see in the midterms unions doing that was innovative and effective?
Sure, and just to set the context, the first question that, the U.S. system I think is fascinating for so many reasons, primarily because we are a two-party system for the most part, but that has changed over time. People are more and more starting to identify as independents. Independent means different things to different people. But even if we have, say, the split, I think, is Democrats 46, Republicans 43, so the Democrats have a slight edge, independents being 11%, but even in that Democratic pool, you have a lot of people voting, independent or, in some cases, crossing party lines. So that's a challenge for us, but we, of course, Democrats, unions, still very closely aligned. Very rarely that we support Republicans because most of them are anti-union. But, in 2020, we elected a Democratic trifecta in the United States because of the labor movement's ability to put street heat, to have the foot soldiers on the ground, to drive the turnout, to combat the enormous amounts of money that are spent on politics. It is staggering when you think about how much money is spent, thinking about this midterm election was, I think it was $17 billion just in 2022 for the midterms. And that wasn't even a presidential, right? And I think I was looking at the LA mayor's race. The mayor's race in Los Angeles was $80 million just for a mayor's race. So how do you counter that money? Well, it's people power, and that's what the labor movement brings to these races. And in 2020, we elected the most pro-union president in our nation's history, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris as vice president. We had control of the House and the Senate by a narrow margin, which we know in this 2022 midterm was expected to flip completely to the Republicans, and we were able to hold on to the Senate by a miracle. And now the seats that were projected to be lost in the House were upwards of 50 seats. We were able to hold down to 5 seats. So it was a tremendous result, primarily because of the labor movement's engagement at the grassroots level. And I can talk more about that as we go, but we took an organizing approach to our politics, which we hadn't really done before. We often used paid media, mailings and text messages and all the tools. But this time in 2022, we said, we're getting back to basics. We're actually going to reach workers face to face. And we're going to have conversations because people aren't talking to each other anymore. They're online, they're in their social media bubble. And to break through that, you have to talk to each other. And so for the first time, we invested in lasting infrastructure that will last through 2024 on the ground that we can talk more about. But our plan is we don't want to fold up and move out after 2022. We want to keep the infrastructure in place for the next 2 years to build toward what could be another disastrous presidential election.
There are so many threads there. We'll come back to that. I want to bring Omar in, though, before we go too much further. Now, your elections this year went for 6 months. Do you want to tell people a bit about that journey, but also the union movement's connections to the political system in Somalia?
Yeah, well, thanks. When I hear my sister what she said, so what's happening in the United States and here in Australia and the struggle that comrades did in Brazil, I think I want to tell you a very unique or very unseen history of what we are and what we have been doing. As a trade union organization, we are not affiliated with any political party. Because the problem is that our political parties are clan-based or because if you see the history of Somalia, tribalism, clanism is very strong, and that is what has divided our society and created a lot of problems. So, as a trade union organization that represents workers coming from different clans, we remained and decided to remain independent from and not associate with anyone. But that does not mean we are not part of the political process. We have been active in the political process just to advance the collective interest of the workers in the processes. For instance, we strongly advocated for Somalia to have direct elections after 51 years. 21 years of a military dictatorship and 30 years of civil war.
So but you also told me before that now, for the first time, you have union-linked MPs, the first time ever.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we advocated direct elections, people's vote, people should be voting for, those who are going to govern, then we got a law that would have the election law that people will vote direct elections. But then 8 men who ruled the country decided to take the country to an indirect election instead of direct election. We didn't support it. We were against it because we felt it's undemocratic. People will not have a say. So we supported, again, we involved in the indirect elections. And how did we get involved? We made sure that the Federal Election Committee has trade union representatives, which we get it. State level or regional election committees to have trade union representatives. And the electoral college that will vote, workers are involved. And then for the first time, we have had a list of trade union candidates who are vying for parliamentary seats, which we have produced. So we had a list of 12 candidates. For the first time, we have got 2 senators and 3 members of the House of the People, 5 members in the Federal Parliament of Somalia.
Congratulations, terrific. Have we got time for one more question, Lisboa, before you go? What do you think will materially change for your members with the change of president? Is this the end of the story for Brazil in terms of your political activity, or just the start?
Eu penso que, primeiro é um impacto imenso, porque a eleição do Lula, primeiro, representa o resgate do Brasil para o seu povo como um todo. Em segundo, representa a manutenção da democracia, ou seja, o fortalecimento da democracia no Brasil. Nós sabemos que quando falta democracia, quem mais sofre, quem primeiro sofre são os trabalhadores e trabalhadoras. Em terceiro, nós esperamos com a eleição do Lula, como disse, que o Brasil retorne inclusive à cena global com defesa das questões relativas ao câmbio climático, com defesa às relações Sul-Sul e a defesa, obviamente, de questões que são fundamentais para nós, como o combate à fome. E, mais especificamente, para nós, trabalhadores, digamos assim, a mudança de um modelo de governo cujo presidente disse algumas vezes, o atual presidente, disse algumas vezes, no Brasil, os trabalhadores precisam escolher entre ter trabalho ou ter direitos, porque não é possível oferecer os dois. Ou seja, em outras palavras, defendendo o trabalho escravo. Então, para nós, o impacto será fortíssimo, porque nós precisamos resgatar o país para o nosso povo e garantir mais emprego, mais salário, mais condições de vida, especialmente para a população mais pobre.
So actually, for workers in Brazil, the election meant a lot. Actually, it's kind of rescuing Brazil back to the people. This is one point. The other point is keeping democracy alive in Brazil. We know that there was many attacks on democracy, and we know when there is a lack of democracy, the first people that suffer are workers. The third point is we also expect Brazil to be back in the global scenario. dealing with topics very important for us as climate change, also strengthening the relations South-South, and also combating the hungry, I mean the people that don't have what to eat. So we expect that there is a change in the model of the government, because the current president actually said that workers should choose between having a job or having rights, that both are not possible to happen. So actually what he was defending, it was a kind of slavery work. And the election of Lula, we expect also to guarantee more work, more jobs, and more wages and better conditions, especially for the poor people in Brazil.
Terrific, thank you. Sally, in the Australian election, which was earlier this year, wages was a really big issue. How did you bring that to life, and what were some of the tactics and techniques you used?
Oh, well, the economy brought it to life. That's the honest truth about that. You can't manufacture a cost of living crisis. It's what people were facing. I think it's more that we didn't approach this as, you know, the election period, whether that be like a month, you know, before the election. We approached this in a longer term sense, and about, you know, knowing that the previous government was attacking working people, and that our plan wasn't just about, when we get to that period, who are the undecided voters who we're going to focus on. It was about shifting people before we got to that point. So that really went to the values of the previous government and their failures. Like, one of the key failures was their just inaction. They just did nothing because it suited them, and it suited the people with the vested interests and that have already got power. And so being able to be part of, over the long term, people making up their mind that there was a problem in terms of having a government that was actively, you know, not acting on the key things that mattered to them. So, of course, then when the crisis of the cost of living came around and not doing anything about wages, people already knew and believed that they weren't going to do anything. They didn't do anything when the bushfires were happening here. They didn't do anything when, you know, there was crises around sexual harassment. They didn't do anything around a whole lot of things. So we are not just about campaigning in that election period, in that particular time. There's a lot more I'll say, but when we get a chance around online campaigning too, it's interesting to hear what they were saying about online brigades. It'd be good to hear more about that later too.
One more question for you. For those that aren't close to Australia, with the new government, there's now laws to improve the ability of workers to go for wages. One of my favourite ever union banners was "ITU says no," because often we campaign negatively. What is the difference between campaigning positively for change and to shepherd these laws through the parliament with a more friendly government?
It's harder. It's harder to campaign for positive change. It's easier to campaign for no, because no is about stopping someone from taking something off you've already got. And so running a campaign to stop privatisation, or to stop some bad thing the government's going to happen, or stop them bringing in a tax like, you know, the other side will run, are easy campaigns to run. It's much, much harder to give people hope that there's something can be better. And what's made that harder is neoliberalism, because people losing faith in the ability of governments to actually do anything about the things that matter to them. So part of you know, engaging in that, which we have to, because I think part of the authoritarian turn, I mean, neoliberalism basically opened the door to it. Like, the minute people started believing that governments are useless, they don't do anything about, you know, the problems we've actually got, things are getting worse, you know, they can't do anything about job security or about wages, may as well vote for a clown like Donald Trump. Like, you may as well vote for Bolsonaro, you may as well vote for Scott Morrison, like, because it doesn't really matter. And so rebuilding faith that democracy will actually democracy we've currently got can deliver on people's real material pressures is absolutely essential. And so that's why our IR laws are essential, because it's about giving, working people a belief that they have a voice again, like an ability to be able to do something about things, and governments have a role in being on their side against corporations. And so hopefully, this is not just about those laws, but it's about rebuilding trust in democracy too.
Liz, the way that many American workers who had been let down by neoliberalism said no was to vote for Trump. That red belt through those states that delivered America to something that no one had ever contemplated. Yeah. Now, it looks like from the results from last week that there's been really strong results back there. So how have you changed the conversation for working people in those seats who had not just lost faith in the Democrats, but lost faith in democracy?
Yeah, to add to what Sally was saying, it's so true that people have lost faith, but also because they're reacting to the fear and the division, the messaging, the hate that has been so powerful over the last few years in the U.S. It's very similar because, defining a villain, that's what seems to work. And Trump was a master at, this message of the us versus them and creating these polarizations that I think people are just fatigued. You talk to people now, they want something better. And it doesn't stop the negative ads from flowing, because those obviously work. But what we were doing as a trade union was to cut through that noise and say, you know what? This is about issues. This isn't about necessarily Democrat or Republican. It's about inflation. It's about your health care. It's about good jobs. It's about protecting collective bargaining. And so we were able to use an issues-based approach, redefine what that relationship was with our members, because they were so mistrustful. Who was giving them information? Which should we believe? We wanted to be the trusted messenger. And so that was our goal, was to sort of reestablish that relationship so that people could listen and hear us, because there's so much noise out there and so much misinformation and disinformation. And so, we went back into the work sites. And it was something that sounds so simple, but that we had gotten away from because of the toxicity. Our leaders were afraid to talk to their members because it had become so divisive. And so what we did is invest in training, so that in every Central Labor Council in our network, we had an organizer and a trainer who could help our leaders learn how to de-escalate, how to pivot, how to have an issues-based conversation that wasn't toxic, so that we could actually restore that foundation of trust. And we just got started in 2022 with this new approach, and we are going to be on the ground every single day for the next 2 years and not let our foot off the gas, because we found that it works. And we had gotten away from just the very basic face-to-face approach. So I think that was a really powerful result from 2022, that people were fed up with the hate and the division, and that we could say, yes, our freedoms are under attack, but to make sure that people aren't seeing this through this lens of highly partisan, extremist kind of approaches. It's no, we're working people, and we need to reclaim our rights and our freedoms. So that's what we think, really worked this time.
And those personal conversations are kind of the opposite of what you get on toxic, automated commercial platforms that are weaponized to create division, right? So do you think there's a shift back from, and happy for Sally and Omar to weigh in on this as well, are we entering a point where that whole week, every election is just going to put more and more money into Facebook, target your audience, and that's how we win? Do you think this grassroots sort of changes that sort of matrix a little bit?
I do. The power of social media is still there, and people will continue to rely on it. And in fact, there are new tools being developed every single day. I will say people are starting to see through, the fact that anyone can buy ads on Twitter and Facebook and have a message that can be misleading. And that's where the trust factor has really dissolved. And in this last election, we were able to, as the union, kind of be that trusted source. I think we'll continue to struggle with that. I'll pivot just quickly to how social media is being used in collective bargaining as well, because it's the same patterns that we're seeing over and over again, that people have a narrative that gets out ahead of where leaders are, or where our plans, the brilliant plans that we drafted, sometimes get undercut because there's a movement in Facebook or social media that takes on a life of its own. So I think we're going to continue to have to grapple with it and have strategies to counteract it. But I do think people are starting to become more wise to the fact that people are trying to manipulate you out there. And so I think there is hope.
You're also the leader of the Somali Journalists Union, which is now the most dangerous place in the world to be a journalist. There are 2 more deaths last week. So the idea of entering into elections with gusto in the context of political violence must be a huge barrier and create real need for real courage to engage politically. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the environment for political campaigning in your country?
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, the point that Liz just mentioned about money being bombed in the elections, yes, that the money that she's talking about is the money in the US being fundraised, or maybe corporate is bankrolling politicians. But for us, it's getting quite different. In our last 2 elections, the funding was coming from outside the country. And especially the Gulf countries were bombarding huge amount of money in our elections, our politicians. For example, when the parliamentary election was over and we were heading to the presidential election, because our parliament elects our president, UAE brought, for example, United Arab Emirates brought a huge plane with cash. Try, to bankroll, certain candidates so that they get their own favorite candidate to become the president. On the other side, we have Qatar, who is their rival, doing the same, trying to push it. But during the election campaign, one of the serious things that we have seen as journalists or as trade unionists is the hate that Liz just talked about in the social media. People even not controlling it, incitement to violence. People were dying in the election places. People were being bombarded. Of course, we have earned the bad name of being the deadliest country for journalists in Africa. 54 journalists murdered in 10 years. And these are workers. These are family people. They are the breadwinners of their families. And they were killed just because of their chosen profession. And that challenge existed, of course, and it continues to exist. Even after the election, in 1 month, like you said, 2 journalists were killed. Why? Because they refused to be a propaganda machinery for the Islamists, for the terrorists. And that is why, we are paying, heavy price for the violent extremism that is spreading in our communities, in our society. But I can tell you, with all the difficulties that happen in our society, our unionists, for example, my home union, the Journalists Union, and our National Federation, we are committed to say, look, it is only us when we stand up to challenge the injustice and, campaign and advocate for our country to transition successfully to democracy. Because if we fold our hands or resign with silence and say, look, we gave up, who's going to fight for our country? So that's why we have certain priorities now. We get to make sure that we need to have direct elections. Somalia cannot afford, again, indirect elections. I was telling, for instance, the US ambassador before I came here, and I said, Ambassador, if you want Somalia to be a democratic country, please, we want you to support people's vote. 1 person, 1 vote. Because, of course, the international community has a lot of influence in our country. That is something very important to us. Second, what we want is and what we have succeeded in the last election was there were some anti-trade union politicians, like very, repressive Minister of Labor, who was against the trade unionists and freedom of association. We decampaigned him in this election, and we made sure that he loses his seat. And you know what? Who has defeated him? 27 years old trade unionist has defeated him.
But just give us a flavour of the way that unions were actually working on the ground with all those constraints of violence and Gulf money. What were you guys doing that shifted the needle?
Yeah, well, our union movement initially emerged because, like, during the late years in the Civil War, and how it has emerged because there was no governance in the country. But I remember our colleagues from ITUC Africa or ICFTU Afro then used to tell us, listen, Somalia has a booming private sector. So where there are private companies, then there are workers. So go and organize workers. So workers were organized and emerged in that environment. And the biggest drive was that when we are united, when we come together, we can have a collective defense. Because warlords, drug dealers, Islamists were all killing, citizens, but also mainly the workers. The extortion, in the streets. So workers and their families were very fed up with this kind of a situation. So more than, having a collective bargaining, improving, wages or salaries or working conditions, it's like, okay, let's come together in a union to defend our safety, our security, fight injustice, and tackle warlords. That's how the unionists first emerged. And then when the government was formed and the transitional government came, even now we have a full functioning government, then the unionists have become very active to demand, okay, we need freedom of association. We need collective bargaining. We need, to have a say in the labor market. So this is why now we are saying, okay, even if we don't like whatever elections we're having in our country, we are not going to fold our hands and wait somebody to come and serve us or help us, our country, take to a democratic nation. We will be at the forefront, fight it. We will not be, taking the issues of tribalism or clan, anything that divides us. But what unites us is more than what divides us as a nation of 15 million.
Sally, it's like democracy starts in the workplace.
Well, not just in the workplace. Workplace is critically important because, of course, that's where you get the distribution of things. But I think going to the issue of social media, that we shouldn't see this as just another place to broadcast, like to advertise. It's, we talk about workplaces, which are absolutely critically important, absolutely, and communities. Communities are now online communities as well, and that's how we should think of them. And then we apply our organising minds and our abilities to those online communities. And I think that a lot of people are spending a lot more time thinking through issues and talking through issues there than they are in their communities or in their workplace. And so if we see it that way, we're the ones who know how to organise. We just need to apply our ability to do so there. And I think that the last couple of years with the pandemic, and probably depending on where you are in the world and your various pandemic experience, that this has become a big organising area for the far right. And this isn't just about money going in. It is about manipulating people, absolutely, when they were the most vulnerable. But it's solidified communities around conspiracy theories, and that is something that we confront now that is different to what we confronted 2 years ago, and that we've just got to face up to that. That's the fact. And like here in Melbourne, always used to be the people on the streets were the workers. During the pandemic, the people on the streets were conspiracy theorists and anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-vaccination people. This is a shock, But this is now the reality. So how are we going to respond to that reality?
So how do you respond to that? What are some of the things you're doing to build healthier online spaces for unions?
I think part of it is going back to what we were talking about before, addressing the most pressing real-life reasons why people are needing community and also feeling as though they don't fit in and have their place. So there's a very high level compared to OECD of insecure work in Australia. And so when people are more isolated and not a part of being able to, build a life like others, that more susceptible to all of this for good reasons, because they feel as though they're outsiders, and being treated with respect, even if that respect is coming from, I'm the one who can see through all these lies, and actually, that vaccine's going to kill you and I've got the knowledge. It's giving them status and respect, and then within their community. We, the unions, were the people who did exactly that before. And so, just why it's so important to rebuild the collective structures, because there's different collective structures responding to the outsider effect that's happening. So, the culture wars, so-called cultural wars, and issues that are thrown out like that are just used by the right in the simple ways to try and, divide people. But we need to focus on the most important thing, and that's people being able to, if it's safety would always be first, and then their economic security, like those issues. If we neglect that then leads to everything else.
Liz, changing it up a little bit, I'm interested in the people that become politicians. One of the, I think, really great images of the midterms was John Fetterman, who does not look like your normal politician. What role do unions have in identifying future leaders and growing them?
Well, we were constantly beating the drum around the need for an economic message. And so that was where in Pennsylvania with John Fetterman, he took it seriously. And so you saw the success when they were talking about issues that meant something to working people. When he was accessible, he wasn't, trying to be something he wasn't. He was connecting with people in a different way. And candidate recruitment is critically important. If you think about the Pennsylvanias, you think about, some of the victories, we could go down the list. It was because we had recruited candidates that really put workers first. And so that is critically important. So we have the folks who are identified by the party. And then we have, as we were just talking earlier, union members who actually step up to run themselves. And that's something that we've prioritized as a labor movement as well, to recruit and source from our ranks. Because we're the best spokespeople when it comes to, you think about all the issues that matter to people in an election. It's all the things we fight for on a daily basis. So we're natural candidates. And in fact, in this last midterm, I looked at the stat, we had over 500 union members just get elected in the US in 2022, which includes 15 in the US House of Representatives, which is a high watermark for us. And so putting energy and resources into the training pipelines that we need. We have a candidate school that we, at the state level, it's a requirement for, like New Jersey, for example, makes every single candidate running for office go through their union candidate school, whether they're a union member or not, so that they're familiar with the issues and that they can speak, to the needs of working people. And also to get our people who have never run for office before primed and ready in how to do the fundraising and how to make the, bolster their networks and get their campaigns in order. So I think that's an investment that we've been investing in for some time that I think is only going to grow from here, because also at the state and local level, we know how important it is, yes, nationally, but really to get that farm team, so to speak, at the local level that can then be that pipeline for candidates at the national level as well.
Sally, I know that there's a stronger institutional link between Australian unions and the ALP, and there's a lot of former union leaders who now are elected reps. But I also notice whenever I'm in Canberra that there are rank and file workers being taken through to meet with MPs, and how much is that individual affiliates or part of a coordinated campaign in terms of building accessibility to power?
I think that people are really sick of the political class and that they see that they're fake. And, you know, the funniest thing, they're starting to run like, oh, you know, we've got to be authentic. We've got to be authentic. And like, maybe let's run a course on how to be authentic.
Yeah.
You know?
Wear a hoodie.
Yeah, yeah. And so like this is fake authenticity that's now sort of like developing, and you know, and then you watch some of them try and build their social media profiles, and you know, anyway, I mean, we had a coal miner elected in the Hunter Valley, which is an area of coal mining, and where there's been a higher and higher vote from one of our far right parties because people felt left out, people felt, you know, they weren't being listened to, and he did really well, and he's just been himself. And that the more we insist on that, the better. I think it's inevitable that once people become part of politics over a period of time, you're going to become more like, you're going to become a bit more institutionalised. I think that, you know, even the best to a degree are going to do that, but we consciously go about reminding people about who they represent, and by that I mean the people. So that's why we make sure that politicians, Labor Party politicians, all of them remember the faces and the stories and about who they're there for, because I can tell you, knocking on those doors all the time at the big end of town as well, you know, always remind, you know, who they're there to represent.
Omar, you talked about the first time ever union members being members of your parliament now. How did you work with union members and union representatives to grow them into leaders?
Yeah, first what we have done in our unique case is we have conducted, with the help of the ITUC, a survey among our membership. We wanted to know, first of all, are they interested about the politics? Or they are not even interested about politics, the political process in the country, the peace-building process in the country. Then the response was, they were forthcoming. They were saying, yes, we want to be part and parcel of it. But then they were also thinking, okay, they don't know how to reach there because it's a zone that's locked for certain political elite. So these, you know, poor downtrodden workers cannot reach there, but they are interested. Then when we have realized their first interest in the survey, then we conducted another survey. What are the workers' issues? What are the issues that we want? And then we have come up in our survey 6 major issues that workers are interested to get from these elections, or the politicians that will be elected to be subscribing to. So that we have developed on the basis of that what we call workers' manifesto in the election. So on the basis of that workers' manifesto, then we have organized, you know, a training for, like Liz was saying, that they are more advanced than us, but we have organized, you know, 12, you know, unionists have sent 46 union organizers to be trained as campaigners about election issues, what is at stake, and how do we challenge the politicians at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and even the clans. How do we deal? How do we negotiate within the clans? So when our union organizers were trained, then we started organizing town halls, and we organized it in the 5 federal member states. After we have finished the 5, you know, federal member states, then what we have come up was the list of the 12 candidates that were coming from the trade union for the first time. That's why then we started negotiating and campaigning inside the clans, inside the regions, inside the federal member states. That's why how we succeeded to get the 5 elected parliamentarians.
Congratulations. We're almost coming up to the hour. I wanted to ask all of you a final question, which is, you're the heads of your national associations, and what do you get from being part of a congress like this? What do you walk away with when you come into this mix of movements and different political contexts and different, but sharing this moment in history? What do you think you get away, and what do you hope to take away from this event?
I would say inspiration, because just listening to you, I'm inspired, and it gives me the energy to take it back and keep going and keep building. And also just baseline best practices, new ideas and things that we can replicate and share and learn from each other. Yeah.
Thanks. Sally?
We always talk about solidarity, and we get within our own countries, like there's this, then this just deepens and renews it. And then Omar, you listen to his story and what you've done, and you face what you face every day, just thinks, well, whatever I have to face is nothing, compared to what you do.
Well, I always say that a challenge is always a challenge, and if you are in US, or if you are here in Australia, or if you are in Somalia or in Brazil, the challenge is always there. The workers, are being oppressed, and for us, the fight is for social justice, and we cannot attain social justice, by remaining at our workplaces or in our unions. That's why we have the best spokespeople for our communities and our society. And from a congress like this, it just uplifts our spirit to go back and do the good fight, because that is what our people need.
Guys, thank you. Any last comments anyone would like to share? Are we good? Any final comments or anything that's on your list that we haven't shared? All good?
I guess just thinking about the threats to democracy. We didn't get to that, but knowing that it's a constant, we have to work at it. You can never take it for granted, and that we have a lot of misinformation, disinformation, extremism brewing out there that the trade union movement is the antidote to. And so it's on us. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's also an opportunity that we continually work at it, reconnecting with our members, emboldening them, empowering them, and making sure our democracy is safe and healthy.
I think that we all could do more in terms of how we coordinate in terms of what is a coordinated also online organisation of the right, and we're all facing it in different ways, but it's the same thing, and actually it's the same people that are driving it as well, and we're all struggling with this in our different ways, and I think that we now need to get ahead of this so that we're the ones on the forefront of driving the fight back.
In our context, one of the, situation is that violent extremists exploit is the abject poverty in our communities, in our societies, especially youngsters. They just graduate and then they're jobless. So one of the things is that as a National Trade Union Federation are, now advocating is that, look, we need to get decent work. And it's even a solution to violent extremism. Because all these youngsters who are joining in the ranks of terrorists like Al-Shabaab, like ISIL, like Daesh, all of these people are going there because they're jobless. They don't have jobs, they don't have incomes, So because of that, they are being recruited. So we are telling our government, the international partners, please give priority to decent work agenda. That is also a solution to violent extremism, and it could be part of the fight against terror.
On that note, a challenge for all of us to keep the fight going. Can you please thank Liz, Sally and Omar for their wisdom and their leadership? And we'll be back at lunchtime tomorrow to talk about the caring economy.